Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in our study of Genesis chapter 39. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with that old poem called Footprints in the Sand. I remember reading it on a sign in my grandparents' house that was hanging up in their bathroom. They had all sorts of wooden signs in their restroom, some with funny stuff written on it, and some with deep thoughts, or phrases that make you think. And I remember reading them all as a kid over and over. And as an adult, I now realize why they had all of these signs displayed in the bathroom. That's what people did in the bathroom before cell phones were invented. You read signs. I wasn't even saved until I was 25 years old, but the Footprints in the Sand framed poem still was simple enough that I could understand it. Anybody can understand it. It spoke of a person dreaming about scenes from their life. They saw two sets of footprints where God was walking with them. During the hardest parts of their life, there was only one set of prints. The caption says God spoke and said it was during those times that I carried you, when you only saw one set of prints. And I understood even then at an early age that this serves as a comfort and a reminder that God is always present, especially during trials. And it's funny how I could understand that as a kid and remember it today, 40 plus years later. But so many times I forget it as an adult. And usually during those times that He carries me, so to speak, that I forget that His presence is ever there. Now, I'm sure I'm not alone when I confess that there have been times that I have wondered, Lord, where are you? And usually when God seems distant, it isn't because He's moved, it's because we have strayed from Him. But if we are honest, we have all had times when we are doing things right to the best of our ability, which is still not good enough by the standards of the law, but we are still doing our best to walk in the light as He is in the light, and we find ourselves in a trial or in a pit of adversity. Sometimes you can do everything as right as humanly possible and still have bad things happen to you. Now, I'll confess that during those times, I have one of two reactions. The first, I will grow angry at those who have wronged me, or second, I will throw a pity party and wonder why God would allow these things to happen when I've been doing my best to walk with Him. For some reason, we think that bad stuff should only happen to the wicked and not those who love the Lord, not those who serve Him. That's kind of thinking that's found in the prosperity gospel or the word of faith movement, but it is not taught anywhere in the Bible. In fact, there's a man named Job in the Bible who might have a few words to say to us about that kind of nonsense. Jesus also knows something about suffering when you have done nothing wrong. He died a cruel death for sins He did not commit, and He is the only one who never sinned. Now, there have been many similarities and foreshadows of Jesus so far in Genesis, and it seems like most of those are found in the person of Joseph. When we first saw Joseph in Scripture, he was betrayed by one of his brothers, stripped of his clothing, and left to die. And then one of them decided that they could sell him for a few pieces of silver. These are pretty uncanny similarities, and those are just a few. And we covered those pretty extensively in our last study in Genesis. Back in chapter 37, we are told that in the final verse, he was sold as a slave into Egypt. And then chapter 38 covered the sins and the sons of Judah. The level of depravity and the blending in with the Canaanites was getting so bad, God is going to have to get Israel out of the land and isolate them from every other wicked nation and their influence. And Egypt, of all places, is where God chose to make that happen. The Egyptians viewed the Jews as an abomination, as we're going to see in future chapters. They didn't like people that were shepherds and such. And we're going to get a glimpse of the anti-Semitism in Potiphar's wife when she gets rejected by Joseph in this chapter. But in Egypt, they would settle in a location called Goshen, and they would pretty much keep to themselves when they're doing forced labor by Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph and the future generations, and Pharaoh didn't understand why these people were living among them. But when they were not working, they kept to themselves. They didn't, go out and mingle with the Egyptians and all of their false gods and idols and that type of worship. When Joseph was thrown into the pit by his brothers and then sold into slavery, Joseph didn't understand why. But yet he had upset his brothers by sharing his dreams. But if he had not made his dreams known to them, they would not be able to look back and see later that all of this was in God's hands the entire time. Other than that, Joseph had done nothing to deserve the circumstances that he now found himself in. Remarkably, we never see Joseph doubting God during these times. You will never see him throwing a pity party or feeling sorry for himself. And what is amazing is that he kept going, no matter what happened to him. And he didn't know how his story was going to turn out in the end. Joseph couldn't just skip ahead a few chapters in Genesis and see what God was doing. He simply kept walking with God and doing what was right the entire time. And it's my prayer that by studying the life of this remarkable young man, that we will find the same strength to carry on when we face adversity. I said when because that's a guarantee in this life. Maybe we even have just a portion of the faith that Joseph had. I would be thrilled with that. So we would spend less time doubting and questioning the sovereignty of God and simply trusting Him, even when we don't understand why things are the way they are, and that we will always strive to do the right thing, no matter where we are or what we have endured. So in chapter 39, let us begin with verses 1 through 4. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites, who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. Verse 39 reminds us of what we were first told in chapter 37. He was auctioned off and bought by an Egyptian officer from Egypt. So thus Joseph became the very first Jewish slave in Egypt. Immediately, we who know how this story unfolds in the end can see the hand of God already at work here. We first saw that when the Ishmaelite caravan came by that route at the exact time that Joseph is in a pit and his brothers were deciding what to do with him. That was no coincidence. Neither was the mention in Scripture of the things that these Ishmaelites were trading and selling. Spices and myrrh. Some of the things that we're going to find being brought into the tomb of our Lord after he is unjustly disposed of. These are also the same things that we see the wise men bring him when they visited him as a child. It never said that they were slave traders. It is possible, but there is no mention of that being among the wares that their camels were carrying. Then for Potiphar to buy him is another event that has God's fingerprints all over it. He could have ended up in a field somewhere, owned by some random cruel slave owner in an obscure corner of the country. But it just so happened that a leader among Pharaoh's bodyguards chose him. Joseph might not have realized it, but he was right in the middle of divine providence. He was a slave in a foreign land, yes, and a land that held hundreds of idols and false deities. The people even viewed Pharaoh himself as a deity, but Joseph was exactly where he needed to be. He was right in the middle of God's will. I've heard others make a point that the word used for officer when it described Potiphar was the same one used exclusively in Scripture for eunuch. Now, I was curious to see if that was true. So using one of my trusty books, I found that it is indeed true. The Hebrew word is pronounced saris. Now, the definition says from an unused root, meaning to castrate, a eunuch, thus a minister of the state. Now, does this mean with absolute certainty that Potiphar was castrated? For the word eunuch could also be used as a title. It's used in some places for men who had been cut and some for men who had not been cut. You might wonder, well, if he was a eunuch, why would he have a wife? There's the possibility that Potiphar was previously married, and then he got promoted to this position that required his castration. Now, we don't know if Egypt required this among those who served pharaohs, but many other countries would require this to be done to their most trusted servants and their most important positions. This way, the threat of a man being led astray by romantic interest and emotions would be minimalized. So if indeed Potiphar had undergone the knife for this job, that would explain the behavior of his wife in the upcoming verses. But other than that word being used here, we simply don't know for sure. It's just a possibility. Rather than finding Joseph out in a field in the middle of nowhere, he is now serving someone who is connected directly to Pharaoh. It's not exactly where God intends for Joseph to end up, but it's certainly closer than where he was before. This is just another step in the amazing journey that this man is going to go through. But now we can see the direction that he is going. In verses 2 and 3, we see that the Lord blessed Joseph in everything that he did. This means that whatever task was thrown at him, he managed to get it done. And he did it with precision, and he made it look easy. Now, I've had a few days at work where that has happened. Very few. Not very many times in the past 30 years. But occasionally, things just happen to go right. And it's obvious that your actions are blessed more than usual on that particular day. Just the other day, I was working on a piece of heavy equipment, which would normally make a preacher cuss. Trust me, I've heard it happen. But that day, that frame came apart easily and the glass came out and went back in so easily, I was suspicious. And as I was putting this thing back together, 2 other coworkers just happened to be there, and when I dropped a part from way up high where I was, so I didn't have to put it down, I didn't have to climb down to get that bolt that I dropped, somebody was there to hand it to me. Everything went so smoothly that I just had to thank the Lord for that. I normally thank Him for every day, but especially on the days when everything just happens to go right without any struggle at all. Every task that Joseph did was done in that same way, that same sense of ease. Nothing bogged him down. Maybe there was nothing that he couldn't do, and the Lord just blessed him right through every task and every test. Now, eventually, Potiphar noticed this. Verse 3 said, "Now his master saw that the Lord was with him." Even a man who lived in the most polytheistic nation in the world recognized that Joseph's God was blessing him. So Joseph kept getting promoted to higher and higher positions, and he ended up working inside the house exclusively and doing more and more work as he proved to be trustworthy. Now, while Joseph was faithful to do his best, I'm sure, we must not forget that this was the hand of God doing this, though. God gets the glory for the success of Joseph being brought into Potiphar's house and all the works that Joseph did, as God should get the glory in our lives. Without him, we could do nothing and we would be nothing. Now let us skip verses 5 and 6. It came about that from the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned, in the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Verse 5 begins here with words that indicate a passage of time. Now, some Jewish commentators say that he was with Potiphar for about 11 years or so, and it appears that the hand of God not only stayed upon Joseph, but the blessing of his works continued to increase more and more. So Potiphar let Joseph just handle everything. He is his right-hand man, so to speak. It said in verse 6 that everything was in Joseph's charge. Potiphar had to do his main job, as a captain of the bodyguard, but all he had to figure out was what he wanted to eat when he got home. His biggest concerns and his hardest decisions: am I having beef and fresh pomegranates today, or do I want quail and sweet rolls? Decisions. I don't want us to miss or zoom past what verse 5 said, though. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned in the house and in the field. Not only was Joseph's work blessed, but God's hand was upon everything belonging to Potiphar, even things that Joseph was not directly involved with. How could Joseph be doing such a fine job in the house and cause the fields and the crops to produce abundantly? That is clearly the hand of God. And even Potiphar recognized this. He knew that there was something to this God that Joseph belonged to. So naturally, he wants to keep Joseph around. He was being blessed for being in the same vicinity as Joseph. And it seems like God's goodness was just radiating outwards and affecting everything and everybody surrounding Joseph. Have you ever wondered why God included Potiphar in this outpouring of grace and blessing? It's not because Potiphar had come to faith in God. He should have, but we don't read that anywhere. He had all of the evidence he needed to do so, but I don't think he ever did. Was it just because he treated Joseph so well that God decided to bless him and his crops too? That answer is because God made a promise to Abraham that also applies to Abraham's descendants throughout time, even today. That promise was made in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Why do you think that the United States of America has always had its most prosperous times during the times that we were the strongest ally to Israel? Because that promise is still true today. God promised to bless those who bless Abraham, and therefore all of his descendants as well. Potiphar was experiencing and reaping these benefits of God's goodness, but it also was residual goodness, for the cause was a promise that God made to this obscure nomad in the middle of the desert, years and years ago. What is amazing is that Joseph is blessed no matter where he is. He did not come into Egypt as a leader. He came into that country as a slave, and he didn't even fetch the full price. That was normally 30 pieces of silver. Joseph only brought 20, but Joseph remained faithful as a slave, and God blessed him right there where he's at. Soon, we're going to see Joseph in a prison, and he's going to have to start all over at the bottom again, and still the hand of God and all of the blessings are still going to be on him. God is with us no matter what we are going through. Sometimes he might choose to protect us and deliver us from certain storms in life. He has already saved you from so many things that were coming your way, and you have absolutely no idea all the things that God has protected you from so far. Be sure to thank him for that, by the way. But sometimes he will allow us to go through storms in order to either shape us or to prepare us for whatever reason. And we might not ever know the reason on this side of eternity. We have no indicator of Job ever being told why he went through everything that he did. Just know that there are still one set of footprints in the sand during those hard times in life. You are being carried, even when you don't realize that he has you in his everlasting arms. Kind of like the times when I was a kid and I would fall asleep on the couch or in a chair watching cartoons, and I believe that somehow I magically teleported to my bed because that's where I would wake up the next day. As I got older, I realized that my Father carried me every time, and I didn't know it. Our Heavenly Father does that with us so many times in our life, and he continues to do so even when we don't realize it, even when we don't acknowledge him. He is so good to us, much more than we deserve. And before we move on, verse 6 sets the stage for the next obstacle in Joseph's life. It says, "Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance." Well, he gets that from his mother. She had the same exact description in the Bible. In Genesis chapter 29, verse 16 and 17, it says, "Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful of form and face." And it just said here that Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. When the Bible mentions that somebody is beautiful or somebody is handsome, they must be absolutely stunning because scripture rarely focuses on the outward appearance of somebody. I think the number of women called beautiful in the Bible is only around 15 or so, and the number of men called handsome is only about 9. Well, that's mainly because my wife and I weren't born at the time that the Bible was being written. Oh, I'm kidding. The only thing worse than my looks is my humility. But here was a young man, blessed in all that he does, and also blessed with good looks. I pictured Joseph as this chiseled jaw and a set of abs. I don't know. I tell people I have abs. They're just well insulated and protected. But Joseph's good looks happened to catch the eye of a person in that household who also had some authority and low morals to go with that authority. And that is never a good combination. So now let's see what happens in verses 7 through 10. It came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire on Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God?" As she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her to lie beside her or to be with her. As I mentioned in the beginning of this study, there's a pretty good possibility of Potiphar being a eunuch, which would render him useless in the procreation department. It's just a possibility, but if that's the case, that would explain her behavior. Now, even though it explains her behavior, it doesn't justify it one single bit. Sin is still sin, but that would help us to understand and to explain it. But there's also the possibility that she is just an immoral woman, and she's struggling with lust, like so many people do. The problem was she's not struggling against it. She's indulging in it. There's no telling how many times Potiphar's wife has done this with other male servants over the years. Her willingness to cheat on her husband now is an indicator that she's the type who has either done it before or will do it again. And this proves that it isn't just men. Women can also be guilty of falling into lust and using people for self-gratification. The book of Proverbs has plenty to say about those just like her. One example of that's in Proverbs 5, verses 3 through 6. "For the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and smoother than oil is her speech. But in the end she is as bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold of Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways are unstable. She does not know it." Now, here is where I disagree with some commentators. I have read where some will say, well, in ancient Egypt, there were low moral expectations of women. Even married women, they didn't expect much morality out of them. That might be true, but I don't believe it, especially in this case. And the reason I say that is because of the response of her husband Potiphar when he is told about her side of the story. He doesn't just walk away and chalk it up, well, that's Egyptian female culture. No, Potiphar is furious. Now in verses 8 and 9, we see Joseph did the right thing. He refused her. Now remember, this took place when Joseph was between the age of 17 all the way through his mid to late 20s. He is a young, good-looking guy, and I'm sure that Potiphar's wife must have been very beautiful. And he is a slave getting propositioned by an official's wife. Now, Joseph is a great distance from home. He's in a land where nobody knows him. And sometimes that's all that's necessary for a weaker people to fall into temptation over any sin, really, not just adultery. How many otherwise good people end up in bars or casinos when they're a stranger in another town or when they're alone in a motel? How many times do you think they're going to still make prudent choices over what they're watching on TV? The first thing that the devil did in the garden was to get Eve alone by herself, away from her husband, away from Adam. Joseph refuses her repeatedly. He told her that doing so is going to be wrong. First of all, because Potiphar has been so good to him, and it would be an offense to someone that he respects like Potiphar. We often forget that sometimes our sins can affect other people and the families of other people by extension, and most people don't think that far ahead until it's too late. But most importantly, Joseph also made it clear that it would be a sin against God. That alone was reason enough for Joseph to say no to her. Now, verse 10 here is just absolutely amazing when you think of the fortitude and the faithfulness of Joseph. It says she spoke to Joseph day after day. I mean, the temptation was there constantly. Saying no one time, oh, that's easy enough. But day after day, every day? Now, this means that he obviously didn't entertain the idea in his mind when he was in his quarters at night, or else he would have lost his resolve and he would have caved in. Never entertain sin in your mind. It's like setting a fire in dry grass on a windy day. You might think you can control it if it's just a small, tiny sin and it's in your imagination, but that can and usually will quickly grow into something that you lose control of. In verse 10, Joseph even took preventative steps. He did not listen to her, to lie beside her, or even be with her. He's not going to sit on the edge of the bed and discuss this. He's not going to go near her room. He made it a point to never put himself in a position where he is alone with her. This is a standard that all married people should do right here. In fact, why stop there? This includes couples that are dating. That includes single people, everybody. Make it a habit to not be alone with someone of the opposite gender. I better be hearing some amens out there. There may have been some times when part of my job involves delivering a customer's car to them, and that means taking them home in their car and then bringing it back to the shop so that I can work on it. Otherwise, the customer is going to have to call a taxi. Even after 30 years, it still makes me uncomfortable when that customer that I have to take home is a female. Not because I'm worried about anything happening. I won't let anything happen. But I worry about the appearance of evil. Now, it might be silly and I might be overreacting, but I worry that somebody that I know or that my wife knows is going to see me in a car with another woman, and then they're going to assume something, and they're going to start spreading rumors and cause all kinds of trouble. I actually had one lady that I had to take back into her house and bring her car back, and she was afraid of riding in the car with me. She made the comment to one of our office ladies that I will call you and let you know when I make it home safely, and if you don't hear from me, you should send for help. And I'm thinking, really? Lady, you're 40 years older than me and you smell like an ashtray, and so does your car. You have a voice that sounds like the guy that does the movie theater trailers and previews.
Coming soon to a Ford Focus near you, abduction of an innocent elderly lady.
Joseph wanted nothing to do with this lady, and so he just made it clear that there's going to be no opportunities. He gave sin no chance there, and he just avoided this lady. And I use lady in a nice term. I won't call Potiphar's wife the things that we want to call her. Joseph did his best to avoid her at all cost. Sometimes I wonder why he just didn't tell Potiphar about her advances. Maybe it was fear that he would believe his wife over a lowly slave, which is exactly the case as we are about to see. So let us go on into verses 11 through 18. Now it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household were there inside. She caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the other men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to make sport of us. He came in to lie with me, and I screamed. And when he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside." So she left his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with these words, "The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to me to make sport of me. And as I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garments beside me and fled outside." The worst part about sin and temptation is that it never takes a day off. I think we all long for a day when we are in our glorified bodies, and it will not be under that curse of sin and that carnal pull of the flesh, a time when the tempter will be no more. But until then, we have to be careful every single day. The Bible tells us our enemy prowls about like a lion, seeking someone that he can devour. And if you've ever watched nature shows, what the lions will do, they can't take something out of the middle of the herd. They'll try to catch one that's isolated itself from the herd, one who's not in the company and the protection of other people. And that's what the devil does to a lot of us. If he can get us away from church, if he can get us away from believing friends, if he can get us away from anybody that we know that would hold us accountable, he's got a better shot at us. This woman is so desperate and so determined to be with Joseph, she has somehow managed to make sure that all of the other men in the house were gone. Perhaps she was thought that he was simply afraid of getting caught by one of the other men. Or perhaps she thought maybe Joseph feels uncomfortable with all of these other guys keeping an eye on him. So she removed every potential obstacle, everything that could have been a roadblock, and gave Joseph a smooth straightaway on the path of sin. To her surprise, he still wouldn't budge. As a Christian man, I absolutely admire Joseph. Maybe that's what I'm going to do. When I get to heaven, I'm going to seek Joseph out and just give him a great big old hug for being a shining example to us. And if he refuses to let me hug him, I'm going to grab his garment and scream for help. Now, she dropped the hints, she dropped innuendos, and then she gives up on subtle seduction and just decides, you know what, I'm going to try the direct route. She's going to be aggressive in her sinful desire. She grabs him and demanded that he be with her. Now, his response, he literally slipped out of his garment trying to get away from her. She's not letting it go, so he wiggled out of this thing and ran in the opposite direction. Good man, Joseph, you did the right thing. The sad part is, though, in our fallen world full of sinful, deceitful, wicked people, doing the right thing doesn't always ensure that justice is going to prevail. Sometimes a person can do everything right that he can possibly do. You can be serving the Lord with all of your heart. You have the purest intentions, the cleanest walk humanly possible, and you still end up covered in filth somehow. Joseph did everything that we would expect a man to do. He refused temptation day after day. Likely for years, he faced this, and he took steps to ensure accountability. He ran when he had no other choice, and still he is made out to be the bad guy. I think of a conversation that Jesus had with the Pharisees in the Gospel of John. He told them, "You seek to kill me because I tell you the truth." Jesus himself lived the only perfect sinless life that ever existed in human history, and yet it got him nailed to a cross. God in human flesh was charged with blasphemy, perfection charged with sin, absolute holiness receiving the wrath of God on a cruel cross. Now later, Joseph is going to say that what everybody had intended for evil, God intended for good. There's a purpose in this wrongful and unjust suffering, and the same thing was true at the cross. Mankind's worst evil acts were played out that day, and God's most merciful act was fulfilled on our behalf. But back to this miscarriage of justice in the text. She is upset because her attempts to seduce Joseph all of this time has failed. Even her best attempts didn't get her the prize that she wanted. Maybe somebody should tell her, "Ma'am, maybe you're not as good looking as you think you are, Or, ma'am, maybe some people are just faithful and they cannot be gotten by immoral people like you." So she fabricated this story using this garment that Joseph wiggled out of to get away from her. And she caused a scene and informed the man of the house. And then she laid there in her fake crime scene until her husband come home. In verses 14 and 17, we see two consistent things with Potiphar's wife. The first is anti-Semitism. She keeps calling him a Hebrew in a derogatory sense. If you find any hatred in this world for the people of God, I can guarantee you who is behind that behavior at its very core. The enemy of God has always hated the people of God. And the second thing we can tell about Potiphar's wife, you can hear by the way that she says these things that she doesn't like her husband. She hates Potiphar. All is not well in the Potiphar's marriage and in their household. She first tells the men that it was the man that her husband brought home. Again, she tells her husband, the man that you brought into our home did to this. It's your fault. And now in the New American Standard Version, it says he tried to make sport of me. In other translations, it'll say he laughed at me. Now, you remember back when Isaac and Rebekah were living among the people of Abimelech, and Isaac had said that Rebekah was his sister. However, Abimelech looked out of his window one day, and the text said Isaac was laughing with Rebekah. I don't know why they're calling it laughing with or laughing at. Maybe that's a way to sanitize what they were doing and put it nicely, but it's obvious that they weren't laughing and giggling. There's a lot more to it, and that's the accusation that Mrs. Potiphar made to her husband when he got home. Let's continue this in verses 19 through 23. Now when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," his anger burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him into the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the jail. But the Lord was with Joseph, and extended kindness to him, and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all of the prisoners who were in the jail, so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. The chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper. Potiphar's response here tells me that the others were wrong in saying that this was normal for the Egyptian women to have such loose morals. It's not acceptable in this household anyway, because when Potiphar heard this, it said in verse 19, his anger burned. Now, these kinds of sins involve more than just the two people supposedly involved in the act. There are families on both sides that's going to feel the fallout once the temporary pleasure of sin has passed. A few moments of fun can lead to years of damaged relationships, if not a lifetime of lost respect and even contact with loved ones. But rarely do people ever think of these consequences when they're engaging in that type of stuff. Look no further than the case of those two co-workers caught in the affair at that music concert recently. Lives on both sides were affected. Even children are going to carry the weight of those consequences for life. The publicity of the internet also means that that's never really going to go away from them. Back to Proverbs in chapter 6, verses 27 through 29 say, "Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can a man walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? So is the one that goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her will not go unpunished." Then a little bit further down in the same chapter of Proverbs, verses 32 through 35, "The one who commits adultery with a woman is lacking sense. He who would destroy himself does it. Wounds and disgrace he will find, and his reproach will not be blotted out. For jealousy enrages a man, and he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will not accept any ransom, nor will he be satisfied, though you have given many gifts." A more modern proverb from our time would be, "Guns don't kill people, husbands that come home early do." And Potiphar could have very easily done that to Joseph. And in most cultures, he would have been justified in doing that. Later on, the Mosaic law would command people be stoned in cases of adultery. Now, thankfully, it would require more than just one witness, though. So Potiphar's wife would have had to have other witnesses in this case. And a better investigation is going to be necessary rather than just hearsay of one single person. But yet again, we see a case of possible divine intervention here. Joseph is not going to be killed because this is a crime he didn't commit. Now, maybe in his heart, Potiphar might have had doubts, about his wife's fidelity. Maybe this kind of stuff has happened to him before. He's been wondering. Or maybe he just liked Joseph too much to kill him. Or maybe God put it on Potiphar's heart to cast him into the king's prison. Did you catch that? Of all places, the king's prison. Because a normal dungeon or a pit is not where Joseph is supposed to be. He's not going to spend the rest of his life rotting there. And in the meantime, it said in verse 21, the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. No matter where Joseph is, the Lord is always with him. No matter what happens to him, God is always right there. Even when Joseph had no idea what is going on, he was there all along, the whole time. Remember that when you are going through difficult times. I'm teaching this to myself right now. Cling to that when you are enduring a storm in life. Nothing can separate you from the love of our God. And even here in prison, the Lord has made Joseph to prosper, to climb that ladder once again, just like he did in Potiphar's house. And once again, everything he does shines. And he is once again placed in a position of responsibility and trust. Not because Joseph is persuasive or he has natural talent, but because God was with him and has a purpose for him. This position as a trustee in prison may not have been glamorous, as being in Potiphar's house and being Potiphar's right-hand man. And it seems like a step backward if you look at this from Joseph's perspective. But in reality, this is the final step before Joseph is thrust into a position of power second only to Pharaoh. And that is where God is going to place him. And that's how God is going to get the sons of Israel out of the land of Canaan before they completely blend in with those people and lose their distinct identity, just like the descendants of Esau did with the people of Mount Seir. There is always a reason when God makes unexpected moves in our lives. He has a purpose, and we may or may not ever understand what that purpose is on this side of eternity. But we can take the attitude of Joseph in those times when things seem so dark. Not once did Joseph complain about his situation. He simply kept serving God and obediently trusting God wherever life took him.